What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to TTP Sports. So, Daniel Briere is now, I would say, a full-time member of the Flyers front office. I would say it's an exciting time as well, but it's a weird role too, because we never really heard this role in hockey, the special assistant to the general manager. I would assume that's something that could be used throughout sports. I think it's just odd to hear it in hockey, but I think it's nice to hear that Briere is going to be, a part of this Flyers front office for the foreseeable future. Hopefully that means he learns the role, learns the day-to-day operations, learns, how to properly construct a team. Hopefully he has some say in what happens coming to the trade deadline, going into the offseason. And hopefully all of this will work into maybe the hope of him becoming the actual general manager. But that is a pipe dream, and we don't know if that's actually going to happen, but you never know. It could, with the way things are going. So I do want to give my thoughts on that because he did have a press conference earlier this afternoon. So we're going to dissect a little bit of what he said. And I also want to bring up some other stuff, some household items before we get into all the Flyers talk as well. So before we get into all of that, if you are a new subscriber, new viewer to the channel, definitely recommend hitting that sub button. I will greatly appreciate that. So if you're looking for all the latest Philadelphia sports news, recaps, and events, this is the place to be, depending on the outcome. It's great or miserable depending on that outcome. And also, if you're a current viewer of the channel, I am grateful for you being here as always, and looking to continue that down the road. Also, if you're looking for tickets to any upcoming events, sporting events, whatever you can think of, use the code TTPSPORTS down below for $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek. So that could be hockey, basketball, football. I know the Super Bowl's coming up, so it's going to be really hard to find a ticket, but whenever football does come back. Same thing with baseball, whenever the hell that decides to come back. So definitely use the code TTP Sports. The $20 basically takes away the fees. You can use that $20 towards drink, food item at an event because they're very expensive. So definitely the free $20 in your pocket. How can you deny that? So use the code TTP Sports down below at SeatGeek for $20 off your first purchase today. So getting into some household items first before the Danny Briere talk. I know I said in my last Flyers recap we were going to remodel this a little bit. I apologize for that. That didn't happen. We had to push that back a little bit because this setup is not a one-man job. There's a lot of crap in this area. So, moving all the furniture, setting up this desk and the computer setup to make sure it doesn't get damaged and all that crap, and then repainting all that crap as well. So that's going to be pushed back for another 2 weeks. It's not going to be this weekend because I want to be able to watch the Super Bowl without having to worry about all of this. So then I believe it's the following weekend after that when there really isn't anything going on. I would assume so. So we're going to utilize that weekend because, my father is going to help me with this. And yeah, when he doesn't get busy from work, they'll be remodeling that room. And also, sorry for the lighting here as well, because if it looks a little bit orange, it's because the sun peeks in at the worst possible time in this area. So I had to put something on the window to make sure the light doesn't come in, but then the light reflects orange, and it's annoying. It definitely is annoying. And also, I do want to start eventually incorporating some Sixers talk as well, just because it's going to be a weird next couple of days, or I would say the next 24 hours or something like that, because who knows if Ben Simmons does get traded or not with the whole James Harden talks between the Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets. So I do eventually want to start incorporating some Sixers talk, some Sixers recaps. I know I've been very lacking on that this year as well, just entirely. I apologize for that for people that are looking for Sixers content, but I definitely do want to incorporate that. So because the Sixers will be a nice distraction from the Flyers. They definitely would be. But speaking of the Flyers, the entire purpose of this goddamn video. So away from the household item stuff, thank you for listening to that. I know I probably bored your time with that and wasted your time listening to all of that. So Daniel Briere, special assistant to the general manager. There were some things that he said during his press conference, basically, that were saying he's excited for the role. Applying to the Montreal job basically allowed him to study more on how to build a team, how to, the day-to-day operations and all that stuff. But he was saying some interesting things, some things that were obvious that we all know at this point, things that were like, we know this team shouldn't be as bad as they're playing right now. They're loaded with injuries, especially the center depth as well. Kevin Hayes, Sean Couturier, Derek Brassard, who's actually going to be playing tonight against Detroit. And yeah, in case you forgot that, the Flyers do finally play tonight after being a whole week off for the All-Star break. Claude Giroux winning the All-Star MVP as well. Congratulations to him. Everything feels like it's going to be a giant send-off for Claude Giroux at the trade deadline. That's going to be a sad day if that actually happens. But I digress. Basically stuff that we all know. I know people really are tired of hearing it at this point, but it's going to be something that's going to be brought up the entire year. On paper, this year, the Flyers should not be as bad as how they're playing. And yes, injuries do have a factor. Injuries are not an excuse. Other teams have had injuries, COVID issues this year, and other players that were able to be called up for those teams, they rose to the occasion. And the Flyers, for some reason, when they call up these certain players, they just don't take over. They just don't, come up into those roles. They don't produce. They just don't do anything. And I am not sure if that has to do with a mix of everything. I'm not sure if it's the talent's just not there with certain players. The development's not there. There's so many factors that goes into this. And for why the Flyers are so bad this year, it's not just one specific thing. There's a bunch of everything on why the Flyers are so bad this year. And yes, fans have been, ideally, they've just been fed up. And it's rightfully so. And does it get better? I know Briere said some right things, and hopefully he's going to have a say in some things that happened in towards the trade deadline. He did say his next focus is basically going to be the trade deadline. So hopefully he does have some insight there. He is going to help Chuck Fletcher a little bit to maybe, bring back some assets. Maybe he tells Chuck Fletcher, hey, maybe you should go after this guy, and talking about stuff like that. He also did mention, some players down in the prospect system as well. He thinks Tyson Forrester, even though he's been injured this year, he thinks he's going to be a major help to this franchise as well. Cam York, Sade Wisdom, a bunch of these other prospects that this team has. But hopefully it just, it could turn out to be something. I know, just down in my gut, I have a feeling this is going to be set up to, Chuck Fletcher, he might have maybe one more year left on this leash, just because Briere also did mention this as well, that when you have as bad of a season as you're having this year, you have to find ways to take advantage of it, which that means in the trade deadline, I would assume the draft, I would assume the offseason, the free agency, and everything. You have to try to take advantage, because he brought up basically the same thing what happened when he first came to the Flyers after they had probably one of the worst seasons in franchise history at that point, to where they were the worst team in the NHL. They missed out on the Patrick Kane because they lost the lottery, and then Paul Holmgren came into that mess, and then he basically righted the ship. He brought in a bunch of free agents, he made a bunch of trades, brought in Danny Briere, brought in Scott Hartnell, Kimmo Timonen, everyone basically at that point, John Freelupo, and that team really bounced back, and they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I'm assuming that's where kind of the points he was bringing up there as well, because that's basically what he means. When you have as bad as a season as you have, that's what Paul Holmgren did. The Flyers had that terrible season, and he took advantage of that with the trade deadline, and he also took advantage of that with the offseason trades, free agents, and everything like that. So I'm assuming that's what Danny Briere is also talking about in this instance. The Flyers, they utilize the trade deadline this year. They trade away a lot of their free agents, get those assets in return. Wherever their landing spot in the draft is this year, they use that pick to select wherever they land at, and then they take advantage if they want to do some trade deadline trades as well, make some hockey trades too, sign some free agents. Hopefully, the assets you bring in return as well for some of these trades, maybe there's some high-end prospects. I would assume the only player you would get that term of like high-end prospects or even an impact NHL player would be more likely from a Claude Giroux trade. Maybe you get something for Rasmus Ristolainen. I know the Flyers are probably still 50-50 on that scenario, but Rasmus, Ristolainen, you could probably get maybe a first-round pick. I know some people think you might not get what you're thinking for Rasmus, but there are definitely teams, especially contending type of teams, that are going to pay for a physical right shot defenseman who can play on the right side, because, that's something that is not, I would say, common in the NHL. So definitely a contending team would probably shop for a guy like a Rasmus Ristolainen and a Claude Giroux. I know a lot of the rumors right now are basically, the same teams, the Colorados, the Minnesotas, the Carolinas, the New York, all those other types of contending teams that could probably shop for Claude Giroux. And at this point, I'm not sure what the return you can get is. I know Newhook, they're saying a lot of people don't think Colorado's going to give up Newhook. A lot of people are saying that Colorado might entice a guy like a Tyson Jost or something like that. I believe that was the player that was brought up. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a bidding war. I'm not going to say what the Flyers are going to get in return for Claude Giroux. It's most likely going to be at least a first-round pick and a prospect, maybe an impact NHL player at that standpoint. But when you're getting into that bidding war, Chuck Fletcher, at the end of the day, he needs to take the best offer possible. He can't be lowballed, and hopefully he doesn't get lowballed. So that's an entire scenario right there. But with Danny Briere, hopefully that means in the oncoming future that this, if he learns, he knows what he's doing. I know he said like 7 years ago he had no idea what he was doing in terms of how the front office and worked like that. He went to school, he got a degree for it, he worked into the Flyers organization. He was one of the people that ran the Maine Mariners, where the Flyers sent him over there to basically learn the day-to-day operations and how to run a hockey team. And Briere has had his touch on the Flyers this year as well. He's been with the Phantoms for a little bit, I think, behind the bench. So he's basically been everywhere for the Flyers this year with the Phantoms. I'm assuming he was with the Maine Mariners to start the season. He's been in the front office this year. I know he's been in the press box a couple of times as well. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to look into in regards to Daniel Briere. Hopefully that does mean in the near future he can work up to that role of becoming general manager, because like I said, I do think Chuck Fletcher might have maybe one more year left on his leash just to try to right this ship. And if everything turns to shit next year again, maybe that means Chuck Fletcher is gone and Danny Briere gets the role of being the general manager and he gets the way to run the team the way he wants to. I have no idea. Maybe Chuck Fletcher just gets moved into the president role like Paul Holmgren did when Hextall came into the scenario. So it's going to be an interesting times, especially because we're not looking at this Flyers team to compete at all. No way in hell. They're nowhere close to making the playoffs. They're most likely going to be a bottom feeder the rest of the season and basically fighting to get that number 1 overall draft pick with the draft lottery. And like Danny Briere said, his main focus right now is focusing on that trade deadline. And I think at where we stand right now, the trade deadline is like a month and a half away. I think the trade deadline, if I do believe, is on March, 21st, a Monday. I think it is around that point. So we're basically a month and a half away from the trade deadline. So that's basically going to be a major focus. The Flyers are going to be probably sending their scouts all across the league to see what players they could probably get in return for certain, guys they can trade away. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. Danny Briere, definitely excited to see what he can bring to this front office. Hopefully that means he gets into a bigger role in the near future, and he definitely learns the ins and outs of becoming a general manager and how to run an NHL team. But yeah, definitely an exciting time for that standpoint. For the Flyers standpoint, basically you're waiting until the trade deadline to see what happens. But hopefully before that standpoint, you get to see Claude Giroux get 1,000 games with the Philadelphia Flyers before he does hopefully gets traded. I know basically at the end of the day, it is Claude Giroux's decision with his no movement clause. There's a lot of things that would hold him away from getting traded because he has a family that lives here. He has a child. He probably doesn't want to leave them for an extended period of time. But at the end of the day, it's Claude Giroux's decision, and the Flyers have to find a way to right this ship going into the trade deadline and into the offseason, and hopefully Danny Briere could be a major part in that. So I want to hear your thoughts on Briere being hired. What do you think this means for his role in the future? Do you think he's really going to have any input going into the end of the season? And do you think he eventually becomes the Flyers GM, whatever happens with Chuck Fletcher? So I want to hear those thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. As always, do not forget to leave those down there. Don't forget to drop a like on this video. Don't forget to check out the pinned lines, which I'm a part of. Their links are down in the description below. Also, don't forget to check out the links to BrodesMedia, the Florida Pod merch website, and also Flyers Nitty Gritty. All that good stuff is down in the description below. Don't forget to check those out. And like I said at the beginning of the video, the most important thing you can do is hit that subscribe button and also use the code TTPSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek. And I will see you next time.